Hi everyone, I'm Michael Baltimore. Welcome to Therapy Talk. Today we want to talk about the borderline personality disorder. There's so many things that need to be said about this particular topic. It's an interesting one to observe. On the other hand, if you're a participant in that circle of friends and acquaintances and perhaps relatives around this person, it's very difficult for you. So we want to talk a little bit about that. I want to share some of my experiences with that. I also want us to make sure that we are going along and looking at the DSM-5, the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and kind of compare some of those various terms and descriptors of this disorder. So we really want to take a look at that, and I'm going to talk along the way about some of my experiences as well. Hopefully it'll help you out. If you are borderline, then you're going to need some help. You need to talk to someone. And for me, it's all about the interpersonal relationships as well as what's going on in the chaos within that person. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. This is some text straight from the DSM-5. Typical features, instability, and that's a key word throughout this. Instability of the self-image, of personal goals, of interpersonal relationships, which I think is a very strong part of this. The affect, and also accompanied by impulsivity, risk-taking, and/or hostility. So that's one of the things we have to think about. So let's just take a look at some of these. Now, in a moderate or greater impairment in personality functioning manifests in characteristics and difficulties with two or more of the following. And at the bottom of this slide you can actually see the first one, identity. Marked impoverished, poorly developed or unstable self-image, often associated with excessive criticism, self-criticism, chronic feeling of emptiness and dissociative states under stress. Number two, remember there are 2 out of the 4 of these. Self-direction, instability in goals, aspiration, values, and career plans. I would also like to say right there that for the most part, sometimes a borderline person has average or above average intelligence, and so these people may be working with you, maybe colleagues, maybe your boss, maybe those kinds of situations where the intellectual ability is there, but the impairment on other kinds of things are not there, and they very, very difficult to work with. You also see something about empathy in number 3. A compromised ability to recognize feelings and the needs of others associated with interpersonal hypersensitivity. This idea of being prone to feel slighted or insulted, perceptions of others selectively biased toward negative attributes and vulnerabilities. I think that's very key. If you've been around the borderline personality, you also know that you sometimes it's contagion in a way, because you sometimes feel chaotic inside. You're not really sure what's going on. You thought you had an idea of and logical and rational steps to move forward in a conversation or in a situation, and all of a sudden you're feeling that way, that the borderline is feeling, that internal chaos, because it does spread out. It is a part of the interpersonal connection, but the interpersonal dysregulation, I think, of emotion and affect, and we'll talk more about that. So in this next one, remember there are 2 out of the 4. Number 4 is intimacy. Intense, unstable, and conflicted close personal relationships marked by mistrust, neediness, and anxious preoccupation with real or imagined abandonment. You know, if you think about it, sometimes there is real abandonment because this person may drive others away from them because of that almost dysregulation, that the hot and cold, that mix of liking and disliking that comes off, and that impulsivity that happens in relationships. So it may not be imagined in some cases. A preoccupation with that abandonment. Close relationships often viewed in extremes of idealization and devaluation, and altering between over-involvement and withdrawal. You know, many times I've heard that story. I've often talked about it in the classes here, at the university that this person meets you very quickly. They get to know you almost as a friend way too quickly. It just happens they call you by first name, for example, a number of other things, and everything is wonderful, almost idealistic in terms of just how wonderful this relationship is. And sooner or later, depending on the cycle and the length of time, it turns around and they begin to devalue you, and you're not the person they thought you were, and so forth and so on. This is almost a defining characteristic of the borderline personality disorder. And I would also say that people don't always have the full borderline personality disorder. They have the traits, they have the trends toward these kinds of things. So it's something that we all need to take a look at. Let's look at a little bit more. In this borderline personality diagnosis, you can look at 4 or more of the following 7 pathological personality traits, including at least one of the following: impulsivity, risk-taking, hostility. Now, you probably can't see this at the bottom of the slide, but I'll read it for you. Emotional lability, unstable emotional experiences, and frequent mood changes. You know, we also talk a little bit about the bipolar with that shifting between this, but this also occurs with the borderline. So emotions that are easily aroused, intense, and out of proportion to the events and the circumstances. Anxiousness, number 2, intense feelings of nervousness, tenseness, or panic, often in reaction to interpersonal stressors. Worry about the negative effect of past unpleasant experiences and future negative possibilities. Not a good place to be. Feeling fearful, apprehensive, threatened by uncertainty, fears of falling apart or losing control. You know, you may not see this. It may be internal, but if this is manifesting itself in the relationships with the other person, you're certainly going to see it, you're going to feel it, you're going to know the effects of this kind of thing. Number 3, separation insecurity, fear of rejection by others and separation from significant others associated with this dependency and complete loss of autonomy. You know, these are the kind of things that happen that drive. You may not always know what's driving it until you investigate further. So it may be this fear of abandonment that they're recreating, reliving, almost in an attachment wound, if you will, of those kinds of things. So very, very important to know about it. This is an interesting word, depressivity, frequent feelings of being down, miserable, and hopeless, difficulty recovering from such moods, pessimism about the future, pervasive shame, feelings of inferior self-worth, thoughts of suicidal or suicidal behavior. So this difficulty that they have in recovering from the down situations and depressivity, this inclination toward that depression, this not seeing the future is very bright. That can be very contagious, but you can recognize this when you're in meetings and when you're around this person and you hear this person talk, that things are not going to go well. It's just not going to be good in the future. Very difficult to deal with at times. Impulsivity, this is a characteristic from other disorders, but acting on the spur of the moment. Some people have said a knee-jerk reaction, particularly those people in power, making decisions very quickly over others. Those kind of things manifest themselves in this disorder. Acting on a momentary basis without plan or outcomes, decision-making over others, difficulty establishing and following plans, a sense of urgency or self-harming behavior in times of emotional stress. Now, you may not see this in the person who is intellectually more developed or has a higher IQ and ability out there in that kind of scenario, but you often see that. So, risk-taking, engagement in dangerous behavior, potentially self-damaging activities, a lack of concern for one's limitation, a denial of personal danger. I might add that this particular one is kind of unique in a way, in that you may not see this in the diagnosis or in the complete overview of the person as you're working with them, but on the other hand, this may be there as well, so we never want to rule that out. Number 7, hostility, persistent and frequent angry feelings, anger and irritability in response to minor slights and insults. So these are the kind of things that we want to be aware of. Remember, those were 7. This is category C in the borderline personality, the impairments in personality functioning and this trait expression that are relatively inflexible and pervasive across a range of social situations. Remember, this is a personality disorder. It's going to take time to treat it. We'll talk about that in another episode. But we also know that this kind of behavior manifests itself across situations. That's why it's a personality disorder, not just something that can be fixed in a short amount of time. And that's something really to take into consideration. Also, this is going to move conflict and manifest all those symptoms we talked about across situation with others. In other words, it's going to repeat itself in other social and interpersonal relationships. So you're going to see it more than once. It's not just with you that they're having that problem with. They're going to have it with others, and you're going to see that as it moves forward. Let's take a look at what we have next, and this is D. The impairments in personality functioning are relatively stable across time with onsets that can be traced back to adolescence or early childhood. These are, and depending on the theory that you're looking at, if it's an attachment disorder, if you're emotionally focused family therapy or systems therapy, you understand that some of these traumas, this neglect, this wounding, this hurt, may have started very, very early, and there are some theories about that. Certainly the attachment theories from Bowlby and Ainsworth and others talk about that very thing. E, the impairments in personality functioning and the trait expressions are not better explained by another disorder. So there you have it, really. Those are the kind of things that you will see in the borderline personality disorder. Sometimes we talk about the individual and not really consider the social arena, the systems view of things, where the borderline is having a terrible impact on others. There's chaos. You know, we often talked about splitting, where the person will go to one person and say things that another person has said, and pit those two people against each other, trying to split them in a way. That happens often with the borderline personality disorder. It's something that you really have to understand, because if you're the person receiving that and you feel slighted by another person, you don't quite understand what happened in that. The borderline personality knows all too well exactly how that works. And it's really, in my opinion, it's a way of self-soothing. It's a way of calming the chaos within that person, because it's outside. It's external to the person's chaos. And if that chaos is outside is more than, greater than the internal conflict and chaos at the time, then it becomes sort of a strategy that may be used in interpersonal relationships. You see this across the board. It's not just a mental health patient. These are people that you work with, that you work under, and you live with, and you need to know how these symptoms and what this is all about, and that's why I'm bringing you this today. So I thank you for listening, and this has been about the borderline personality here on Therapy Talk, and I'll see you next time.